As Senate Joint Clerk of your committee, it is my duty to preside over the election of the Senate Joint Chair. I'm ready to receive a nomination to that effect.
Madame la co-greffière, j'aimerais proposer la sénatrice Una Martin.
Madam Joint Clerk, I would like to propose Senator Una Martin.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres nominations? It is moved by the Honourable Senator Dalphond that the Honourable Senator Martin do take the chair of this joint committee. It is your pleasure, Honourable Senators and Members of Parliament, to adopt this motion.
Oui.
I declare the motion carried. I invite the Honourable Senator Martin to take the chair as co-chair of the Senate.
Merci, chers collègues. Merci.
Thank you, kind colleagues. Thank you for electing me.
We will now proceed to the election of a Senate Deputy Chair. I'm ready to receive a motion to that effect.
I propose Senator Meiji as Deputy
Thank you,
Chair.
Senator Kutcher. Are there any other nominations? Is it agreed to adopt the motion?
Yes.
Adopte.
Accepté.
Yeah.
Carried.
Members of the committee.
Now, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Members of the committee will proceed now to the election of the joint chair representing the House of Commons.
Are you entertaining a nomination?
Yes, Ms. Fry.
Yes, I would like to nominate the Honourable Marc Garneau.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. It's moved by Honourable Hedy Fry that the Honourable Marc Garneau be elected as joint chair representing the House of Commons of this committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the nomination?
Oui.
Yes.
Adopted. The Honourable Marc Garneau is duly named joint chair of the committee.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a mover for motion 1 that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the joint chairs the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its work? Do I have a mover for this first motion?
So moved.
Don't we have
Thank
to
you,
elect
Senator Wallen.
Madam Co-Chair, Senator Martin, I believe
Yes.
we still have to elect the vice chair.
Oh, vice chair, yes.
And I believe the joint clerk is responsible for that.
Thank you. So let's go back to that, and then I'll come back to this first motion. Thank you, Mr. Garneau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The committee will now proceed to the election of vice chairs representing the House of Commons. I'm ready to receive a nomination for the position of first vice chair.
Yes. Thank you very much. I would be pleased to nominate Michael Barrett.
Moved by Mr. Cooper that Michael Barrett be the first vice chair of the committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the nomination? Adopted. Mr. Barrett is duly named the first vice chair of the committee. I'm ready to receive a nomination for the position of second vice chair.
Je voudrais proposer la candidature de...
I propose Mr. Luc Thériault.
C'est proposé par Monsieur Arsenault.
Moved by Mr. Arsenault that Mr. Thériault be elected as second vice chair of the Committee for the House of Commons. Is it your pleasure, honourable members, to adopt the motion? Very well. Carried. And Mr. Thériault is the second vice chair.
For the position of third vice chair.
Mr. Clerk, I'd like to nominate Mr. Alistair McGregor.
It's moved by Mr. Barrett that Mr. McGregor be the third vice chair of the committee. Is it the pleasure of the committee to adopt the nomination? Adopted. And Mr. McGregor is duly elected as the third vice chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Much appreciated.
Thank you. As you can see, I was quite eager to jumped right into our committee work. So thank you to all those that are serving in the roles, and for our colleagues to have the confidence in us to work on this committee together. At this time, I'll go back to that first motion, and Senator Wallin had moved the motion regarding the services of the analysts. So is it agreed to adopt the motion?
So moved again.
Thank you, Senator Wallin. Is it agreed to adopt the motion? So
Yes.
moved. Adopte. If I may, I'd like to just quickly introduce our very capable analysts. The work that we're about to do it will continue in a sense from last session. For this session is very important. So I would like to first introduce Julia Nicol, and if she can turn on her screen.
Hi, I'm
so
here.
You may see. Wonderful.
Nice to
A
see you
lawyer
all.
who works as an analyst in Justice and National Security section and has worked at the Library of Parliament since 2009. She works primarily in criminal law, human rights, gender, and foreign affairs, and has written a number of publications about the medical assistance in dying. She has supported a variety of House of Commons and Senate committees, including the 2016 Special Joint Committee on Physician-Assisted Dying, as well as the OSCE Parliamentary Association. She's also worked for Health Canada on medical assistance in dying. So thank you, Julia, for bringing your expertise to our committee. Next, if I may ask Marlisa Tiedman to say a quick hello.
Good afternoon.
Marlisa is a lawyer who has been an analyst and manager with the Library of Parliament since 2004. She's worked primarily in health law and Indigenous affairs. She's worked on the end-of-life issues throughout her career, including supporting the 2016 Special Joint Committee on Physician-Assisted in Dying and writing various publications on the topic. As a manager, she has supervised the team that works on social development-related issues, including disability-related issues. So as you can see, colleagues, we have two very capable analysts working with us. Thank you. And now I will turn this over to the joint chair, Mr. Garneau.
Thank you, Senator Martin. That takes us to the second routine motion on Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure. Do I have a mover for the motion that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be composed of the joint chairs and the vice chairs, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration?
Mr. Chair, I have a proposed amendment.
Please go ahead, Mr. Maloney.
Thank you. The proposed amendment be
Mr.
worded
President.
Chair, if I may. Joint chair. Yes, I'm not sure who intervened. It is myself, Senator Miji. I just want to ask whether this is the point in time when we should nominate a member as part of a steering committee. Is this the time we should compose the steering committee? No. At present, we are handling the subcommittee only. It's not the same thing. Very well. Thank you very much for that clarification. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. So the proposed amendment reads as follows: that the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedure be composed of the joint chairs, the deputy chairs, the vice chairs, one additional member from the Senate, and one additional member from the government, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Are there any members that wish to speak to the proposed amendment? I'm looking
Sorry,
for...
Mr. Chair. Oh, there's
Yes,
an echo.
yes,
I
Senator.
apologize. Actually, earlier when Senator Meiji was asking about the steering, I had used the word steering, but the subcommittee, this is the discussion, Senator Meiji. So we will have a nomination of an additional senator to the subcommittee, which in essence will act like a steering committee.
Thank you for that clarification, Senator. Does anybody wish to speak to Mr. Maloney's proposed change? I see Mr. Barrett.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'd look to the mover, Mr. Maloney, for a rationale on the change. The composition of the committee in the pro forma seems consistent with past practices and that of other committees. And so I just, through you, look to Mr. Maloney for the rationale.
Go ahead, Mr. Maloney.
Sure, thanks. Thank you for the question. Actually, the rationale is as follows. As a matter of interest to you, those of us who were on this committee last June will remember that we adopted this amendment as I proposed. And it's actually, the amendment is what is consistent with standing operating procedure at committees in the world we live in, because, as you know, the chair of a committee is always accompanied by one other member from his party. So, for example, if the Liberal is the chair of a committee, there'll be another member, because what it does is that the chair is put in the position of the subcommittee of running the meeting, and it gives the other person the ability to be a spokesperson and not put that on the chair's responsibility.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Is it agreed to adopt the motion as amended?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to speak to this.
I think that's Mr. Cooper. Go ahead, Mr. Cooper.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the rationale provided by Mr. Maloney, but I would note that this committee is different than a regular committee, for example, of the House of Commons. It's a special joint committee, and as such, we have two chairs, one from the Liberals, one from the Conservatives. So based upon the rationale provided by Mr. Maloney, it would seem to me to be appropriate that if there's one additional member from the Liberals, there should similarly be one additional member from the Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Do any other members wish to speak? Ms. Fry.
Chair, I wanted to speak to this because I think it isn't the same thing. That would mean that there would be two Conservatives on the committee. The chair is a neutral person on any committee, and so the chair is not able to vote. And so it means that if we allowed for a Liberal to be on that committee, we would have every party having a vote in the House of Commons, and that is what we are just suggesting, so that we have equal votes. If we have two Conservatives, it would be unequal in terms of the committee votes.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. Senator Dalphond.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. If I understand the motion, it is to broaden the membership of the subcommittee from 6 to 8 members. So our subcommittee would be made up of 8 people. Is that what we're looking for? Thank you, Senator.
Well, in the room, I can only see people raising their hands. So does anybody else wish to speak to the proposal from Mr. Maloney to amend the second routine motion?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just acknowledge Ms. Fry's submission, and I agree with her.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one note of clarification is that in the Senate committees, the chair does vote and also would be able to have a speaking role questioning witnesses. But on this subcommittee, I just wanted to clarify that Senator Meiji, as vice chair, would have a vote, and I, as the Senate co-chair, would have a vote in essence, and that's why we're proposing to add another senator to the subcommittee as well. So I just wanted to add that clarification.
Thank you, Senator. Do the clerks have any comments to make with respect to the usual process?
No, we don't, sir. The committee is free to compose its subcommittee as it sees fit.
Thank you, Clerk. If I don't see any other hands, I'm going
Chair?
to ask. Yes.
So just, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Barrett.
Thank you. So, acknowledging the through you the response and rationale from Mr. Maloney and from Dr. Fry, I echo Mr. Cooper's comments and appreciate that, and particularly not to deviate from the practice that was adopted last year. I would note that most recently the special standing or the special joint committee on the Emergencies Act agreed to not have a subcommittee. So if obviously certainly if we adopt this motion, we will proceed with one, but would just observe that one of a committee that's of similar composition declined to proceed with the subcommittee.
Your point is duly noted, and of course, subcommittees decide whether they want to meet or not. It's something that is available as a tool for this committee. Any other points before I ask for support, whether it is agreed to adopt the motion as proposed, amended by,
Mr. Chair, if I may. Mr. Thériault here. If I've understood correctly, what's being put forward by Mr. Maloney and by Dr. Fry, it seems that this is contrary to the argument put forward previously. We're told that because the chairs are neutral, we need to add more people in composing our committee, and then everyone can vote. But if everyone can vote, why would we need to add anyone else? So I was for adding new people in as much as the joint chairs and remain neutral, and I think that would be a positive move. It makes it easier to work together, and sometimes ensures that the interests of a single party can be brought forward by a voice other than the voice of one of the co-chairs at times when people must make decisions. So it seems to me that there's some contradiction here. Before I vote, I just want to ensure that I understand correctly the two positions that were put forward.
Merci, Monsieur Thériault.
Thank you, Mr. Thériault.
In House of Commons committees, when the committees are voting, the chair only votes if there's a tiebreaker. I'd like to turn to the clerks to find out what the practice is or what is permissible with respect to co-chairs voting in subcommittees. Could we have is there a rule with respect to that? I'm not aware of whether there is a rule, or is there an accepted practice?
As previously mentioned by others, in Senate committees, the Senate chair has a vote and votes first. The established practice with joint standing committees is that the Senate chair may vote as well. The Senate co-chair may vote as well.
Okay, and just for clarification, in the House of Commons with subcommittees, what is the practice with the chair in subcommittees?
Yes, sir. The usual practice in House of Commons committees, including subcommittees, is that the chair only casts a tie-breaking vote if required.
So we have a little bit of a difference in the way things are done. So I'm going to continue the discussion. Mr. Maloney, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm afraid we're getting bogged down in unnecessary discussion on procedure when something I'm of the view that this is fairly straightforward. In response to Mr. Terrio's position, I mean, it's not just a voting position, it's an advocacy position. And you want to avoid having to put a chair of a subcommittee in the situation where he or she is both an advocate and a voting member. It just makes it easier. And let's not get too caught up in this, because we remember that whatever happens at the subcommittee has to come back to this group as a whole. So I don't think there's any risk in this amendment. And I will remind everybody that it was adopted by this committee last June, and it was functioning quite well until the end of that session.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Senatrice Miji.
Senator Miji, thank you, Mr. Chair. I thought the issue was to know whether the joint chairs will be voting. If they're not voting or are voting, once we know that, will we know better what to do about it? Will we providing, more framing by providing yet another member on either side, Senate and House of Commons? Yes, indeed, that is the matter at issue. And allow me to suggest this interpretation. The suggestion of adding 2 more people in composing the committee is to ensure that the joint chairs would not need to vote in favor of their impartiality. That's what the amendment tries to address. Mr. Arsenault.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Joint Chair. I heard the interpretation provided by the clerk earlier, it being one mode of operation for the Senate and another in the House of Commons. Could we agree that within the aim of Mr. Maloney's motion, the joint chairs would simply not vote in the subcommittee, and then we could go ahead and address the other motions? So this joint committee, both senators and MPs, could we agree that in the subcommittee the joint chairs do not vote? Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. Before I address that, we will hear Senator Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Earlier, when I added my clarification note, I should have said I support the amendment moved to add 2 additional members, and I agree with what Dr. Fry said. The reason why we're adding an additional Liberal member to the subcommittee is because the joint chair of the House does not vote. But I wanted to explain again that I would vote, Senator Meiji as vice chair would vote, and that is why we were proposed, I would agree to adding another senator to the subcommittee. So my clarification should have ended with, I do support the motion moved.
Thank you, Senator. Given the discussion that we've had here, I am eager to move on if possible. Everybody's heard everything. I would like to, you've understood the practice with respect to subcommittees and co-chairs from the House versus the Senate. I would like to propose, I'd like to know if it's agreed to adopt the motion as amended by Mr. Maloney. Could I see a show of hands with respect to that, please? Okay, thank you very much. And so the amendment is adopted. Thank you very much. I'm assuming, Senator Martin, we're going to go back and forth, you and I, on the routine motion. So over to you.
I was muted. For motion number 3, one of our standard routine motions, do I have a mover that the subcommittee be empowered to make decisions on behalf of the committee with respect to its agenda, to invite witnesses, and to schedule hearings, and that the subcommittee report its decisions to the committee? Do I have a mover?
So moved.
Curtis Mégy.
Thank you, Dr. Fry.
Oh,
Is it agreed to adopt the motion? Adopted.
Thank you.
And I'll turn this back to you.
Thank you. Routine motion number 4 deals with communications, that the joint chairs be empowered to direct communications officers assigned to the committee in the development of communications plans and products where appropriate, and to request the services of the Senate Communications Directorate and the House of Commons social media team for the purposes of the promotion of the committee's work. Do I have a mover for motion 4?
So moved.
Thank you. I didn't see who said that.
It was Alistair McGregor.
Oh, thank you, Mr. McGregor. And is it agreed to adopt the motion? It sounds like it is. So I declare the motion carried. Thank you.
Routine motion number 6. Do I have a mover? I'm at number 6 according to my. Would the clerks clarify? Am I at 5 or 6? 5. Okay, so I stand corrected. So motion number 6, that the may I have a mover that the joint clerks of the committee be authorized to distribute to the members of the committee only documents that are available in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly. Is there a mover?
Madam Chair,
yes.
we've not dealt with motion 5.
I'm doing motion 6 according to.
Yeah, we skipped over 5. We should do 5.
We should do 5.
We should do 5, yeah.
Okay, so you know these. I have a script that has all of the different motions sort of color-coded, so to speak, between House and Senate. I can do both 5 and 6 if that's okay. I'll go back to 5. All right, so I'll do number 5 at this time. Okay, so I need a mover for the following motion, number 5, that witnesses appearing before the committee be given 5 minutes to make their opening statement, and that the order of questions for the first round of questioning shall be as follows. 5 minutes, House of Commons, Liberal. 5 minutes, House of Commons, Conservative. 5 minutes, House of Commons, Bloc Québécois. 5 minutes, House of Commons, New Democratic Party, and 3 minutes for each senator. Questioning during the second round shall be divided as follows. 3 minutes, House of Commons, Liberal. 3 minutes, House of Commons, Conservative. 2 minutes, House of Commons, Bloc, and 2 minutes, House of Commons, NDP.
Je propose cette motion.
Next.
I move the adoption. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault.
I have a question before we conclude. So, Senator Mégy?
Oui, c'est.
Yes, about the number of minutes provided to each senator. I would like to know, when we calculate this, you see, 3 minutes a senator, if we multiply this by 4 or by 5? That's 15 minutes, if 5.
Okay, parfait.
Very well, 5.
Are there any other questions or comments?
Madam Chair?
Bill? Yes.
Madam Chair, with respect to the order of questioning rounds and just looking to the practice in the House and at the most recently struck joint House and Senate committee, there we go. The camera was having a tough time. Like the Price is Right with that camera. I would propose that the first questioning round go to the Conservatives as the official opposition, and the second questioning round go to the Liberals, just as that's the practice. And then in the subsequent rounds, where the Liberals would appear first, that's switched with the Conservatives, just based on the practice at the most recently struck joint committee.
So I don't see any other hands. I don't see the room, so it's hard to know if there are any other individuals. Otherwise, this is an amendment moved by Michael Barrett to switch the order as per practice in the other joint committees. Monsieur Arsenault?
Oui, Madame la coprésidente.
Yes, Madam Joint Chair. Given that I put forward the motion number 5, I do not oppose the amendment, so we could go ahead with using that amendment.
All right. Any other comments from the floor or online? I see none. So is it agreed to adopt the motion as amended? Agreed. Merci. So we move to motion number 6.
Eh bien, la motion numéro
Very well. Motion number 6 has to do with the distribution of documents. This motion states that the joint clerks of the committee be authorized to distribute to the members of the committee only documents that are available in both official languages, and that witnesses be advised accordingly. Would anyone like to propose the motion? Senator Migy. Thank you, Senator. So is it agreed to adopt the motion? Yes, thank you, everyone. Very good. I declare the motion carried.
And moving on to motion 7, that the joint clerks of the committee be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide snacks and beverages for the committee and its subcommittee. Do I have a mover? So moved, Senator Delphine. And I see no other hands or comments. So carried. Thank you.
Alors, la motion numéro 8, l'autorisation.
Motion number 8, the ability to approve payments and expenditures of the committee. That one of the joint chairs, or under the direction of either of the joint chairs, either joint clerk, be authorized to approve payment of expenditure of the committee. Do we have a mover of motion number 8? Yes, I will move it. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. Is it agreed, dear colleagues, to adopt this motion? Very well. I declare the motion carried.
And moving on to motion number 9, do I have a mover for motion 9 that if requested, reasonable travel, accommodation, living, or other witness expenses, including childcare and or personal attendant care, or the cost of an approved headset be reimbursed to witnesses upon application, not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the joint chairs. Senator Migy, is that you move the motion? Or you have a question? Oh, wait.
I have a question before moving it. Leaving this as stated, well, it would mean that everyone needs to travel to Ottawa. My question is, do you think we could include the fact that we might be operating in a hybrid fashion for our guests, for our witnesses? Do we need to have a special motion to adopt the use of hybrid procedures?
I see Dr. Fry's hand, so perhaps she's adding to, or
I'm agreeing
Dr. Fry's.
I'm agreeing with Senator Migy. I think that what we do in the House right now is we are allowed until the 23rd of June to have hybrid sittings. That has been voted by the House of Commons unanimously. So we could do that because there will still be some people who may not be able to come for various reasons. I, for one, because I'm immunocompromised and I'm not coming into any crowded room.
So the question from Senator Migy was whether we needed an added motion to that effect, or whether we would amend or include it into this current motion. So you think we need an additional motion after this? Okay, since I've saw nodding heads regarding an added motion, for now I will just, there's a comment from Monsieur Arsenault.
Madame la coprésidente.
Yes, Madam Joint Chair. My reading of the motion is that if a witness makes a request, but perhaps a witness might be invited to a hybrid sitting and not an in-person sitting. So Madam Senator Mégy's point is very relevant. Would it necessarily be, given that we'll be hearing many witnesses, will we necessarily be asking them to come in person, or wouldn't we prefer to approve their attending in a hybrid fashion? That would be more efficient. If it's hybrid, well, in any case, it's for those who will be asking and making this request and who would be coming in person. But I'm just wondering, will we necessarily need to hear them in person, have them come to Ottawa in person, or will the clerk be in a position to decide that they could be heard at a distance in a hybrid fashion?
Three hands, so let me first, there are several. Perhaps I can ask Dr. Fry if this is in response to what you heard Monsieur Arsenault say, and then I will move to the other speakers. Dr. Fry, did you want to respond?
Necessary to Mr. Arsenault, I wanted to respond to your question about whether or not we should do a separate motion, or we should just include this in the current motion on the floor.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to the
hybrid.
other individuals first. I'll start with Senator Kutcher, followed by Senator Delphon, followed by Monsieur Garneau.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think that it makes a lot of sense that if witnesses can be heard hybrid or electronically, that we have that as a preferred method of hearing from them. And if that's not possible, then they come to Ottawa. It has tremendous savings. Number one, it has a climate impact. I think we should make that the coming to Ottawa being the fallback, but not the go-to.
Okay, thank you. Senator Delphon?
Merci.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that we add at the end of motion 9 the terms given that witnesses can participate virtually.
Is me up here virtually.
Okay, thank you, Senator Delphon. I'm assuming that our clerks are listening to our conversation in regards to the wording, and maybe this is something we can adopt with the
amendment.
As amended, even though we don't have the exact wording, we all seem to agree that while hybrid sittings are available, that some of these witnesses will appear virtually rather than in person. So I'll go to Monsieur Garneau and Senator Mégy following that.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I agree with Senator Delphon's additional wording. As chair of one of the standing committees in the House of Commons, we receive a lot of hybrid witnesses. And what we do is we cover their costs with respect to providing them with a headset because of the very strict requirements so that the interpreters can do their job. And if they have expenses with respect to their setting up their communications in order to be able to appear virtually. So it really is an expense that we are already covering, I think, in most cases. And if we can just clarify that this applies to somebody who appears virtually, I think that would solve it.
Thank you. And Senator Mégy? Okay, I see your hand, Senator Mégy.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Joint Chair. One moment. I simply wish to add that, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get this straight here. I'm so sorry. You can hear me, that's what counts. Can you hear me? Yes, we do.
OK. Alors, ce que je voulais dire.
So, what I wish to say is that I'll jump in now, given that we're speaking of witnesses, but could we then also suggest a motion about the committee itself? A committee such as ours is independent and is a master of its own mode of functioning. So could we put forward a motion to the effect that the committee itself could use hybrid sittings should it wish, even though we can also be in person, meet in person, or meet online. But anyway, giving ourselves the permission to meet in hybrid settings. What do you think?
A whole, as you say, a very different motion being put forward. But for now, let me just go back to this motion number 9. We've all agreed that until the hybrid sittings are available, that witnesses could have that option or most likely appear virtually. I do see one more hand. So, Monsieur Lezon. And
Oui, merci, Madame la coprésidente.
Yes, thank you, Madam Joint Chair. You have just brought up the point that I wished to make. If we add the fact that we will allow for hybrid sittings, we need to mention in that same sentence that there is a deadline for that, given that we are allowed to meet in hybrid fashion up until the month of June. So, all these additions, this again has to do with traveling and remaining in Ottawa. If in the second sentence in French we say that witnesses upon application be reimbursed inasmuch as their reimbursement is of a reasonable amount, and that then we could add in that travel could also include hybrid or not all the other possible ways of appearing before us. So the idea would be to withdraw travel and to leave that it's up to the joint chairs to decide on the relevance and at the discretion of the joint chairs, and then add what Mr. Garneau pointed out about our covering the costs of headsets and that sort of thing. So I'm just suggesting that we take out
The accommodation about attendant and living.
Okay. The only thing I would comment is that the hybrid will not be there forever, and that we will be meeting in person at some point. So we could leave reasonable travel accommodation, all the wording as is, but we will add to the motion that given the virtual sittings that are going to happen until the end of June, that we'll mention that point. I don't have the exact wording myself, but we can trust that this will be amended. So if somebody has an amended motion, I can put that forward, or we can just say that until we can meet at the end of until the end of June. So, Mr. Maloney, yes.
Thank you. Is there perhaps a chance we're overthinking this? I mean, we have rules in place for hybrid parliament. I have complete confidence in our clerk that when an invitation is extended, you can say we're operating in a hybrid parliament. You're welcome to attend in person, but you can attend virtually and we'll give you a headset. I don't think this needs to be that complicated.
Yes, so why don't I ask the clerks to have an amended motion for the next committee meeting, and we can move on to the next item. And for now, we are all in agreement that we are going to amend this motion. So may I just say, is it agreed to adopt the motion as amended in draft, and we'll receive the draft version at the next committee meeting? May I have a mover for that? Mr. Arsenault? Mr. Arsenault?
Quand vous dites tel qu'amendé, vous...
When you say as amended, you mean the amendment put forward by Senator Delphond, correct?
Yes. Merci.
Thank you.
And carried. Thank you. Motion 10.
Merci beaucoup. La motion numéro...
Thank you very much. Motion number 10. So in camera meetings, that unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by one staff person at an in-camera meeting, and that one additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present. And for the Senate, that the leader or facilitator of the government and each recognized party or parliamentary group be entitled to one additional staff member at these meetings. Is anyone willing to move the motion?
Thank you very much, Madam Fry. Convenez-vous d'adopter la motion?
Is it agreed to adopt the motion? Yes, Mr. Arsenault, is that a raised hand? Have you raised your hand anew? If not, all right.
Adopted.
So motion number 11, do I have a mover that one copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept with the joint clerks for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff? I can't see any of the hands.
So
May I
moved,
have
Madam
a
Chair.
mover?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Actually, I think that was Mr. Barrett.
Yes, ma'am.
Is it agreed to adopt the motion? Carried.
Compliment.
Motion number 12 to publish the committee's proceedings. Do I have a mover for motion 12 that the committee publish its proceedings in both official languages?
Stéphane Lauzon, je propose.
Monsieur.
I so move.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. And is it agreed to adopt the motion? I declare the motion carried.
Motion number 13, may I have a mover that 48 hours notice be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee unless a substantive motion relates directly to business when under consideration, provided that A, the notice be filed with the joint clerks of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday, that B, the motion be distributed to members in both official languages by the joint clerks on the same day the said notice was transmitted, if it was received no later than the deadline hour, and that C, notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days be deemed to have been received during the next business day. Do I have a mover? Monsieur Arsenault, merci.
Thank you, Mr. Arsenault.
Carried.
Motion 14, motion for an interim budget. Do I have a mover for motion 14 that an interim budget of $50,000 be adopted and sent to the Board of Internal Economy of the House of Commons for approval? Is it
So
agreed?
moved.
So
Sorry. So
I
moved.
beg your pardon. I got ahead of myself.
I'm sorry, I got ahead of you. I'm sorry, Mark.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. Is it agreed to adopt the motion? Adopted. Thank you.
Do I have a mover for motion 15 that the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration Support Team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advises the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests?
I move.
Thank you, Senator Dalphond. Is it agreed to adopt the motion? So carried.
Et la motion numéro 16, la motion
And motion number 16 on linguistic revision and editing that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to members. Do I have a mover? Stéphane Lauzon, I so move. Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Is it agreed to adopt the motion? Thank you. The motion is carried.
We have reached the end of the routine motions, everyone.
Monsieur le Président ou Madame la Présidente.
Madam Joint Chair, I'm not sure whether this should be called a motion, but I did send to the clerk this morning a notice of motion, and perhaps we could consent to having it adopted. I will read it slowly. We do have a copy that we provided of an English translation, that all testimony and documents received by the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying in the course of its business on this topic during the second session of the 43rd Parliament be taken into consideration by the committee during this session, and that this be published on the committee's website such that members be in a position to easily refer to the material in carrying out this study. You will remember that we held one meeting in which we did hear witnesses. This is merely to avoid losing the material that we gathered prior to the election. And I think this would save us some time if we were to carry this today. I can, of course, send and have distributed, I'll certainly send through the clerk, the text of my motion. They do have it. Yes, good. That makes very good sense. Mr. Arsenault. Of course, I'm in full agreement with this motion. It will certainly allow us to save time, work effectively, using what we've already heard. Technically, Mr. Thériault has not provided his motion within the required timeline, but I think that if we unanimously agree to accepting it, we can go ahead. I think that this is something that's obvious. If it's not permissible, technically speaking, to carry this motion today, then we'll certainly need to do so the next time. And I think we can do this unanimously.
Comments or interventions? Mr. Garneau, co-chair.
Thank you, Senator Martin. Are we currently doing committee business? Because if we are, then the 48-hour doesn't apply, in which case the motion can be put forward. Or am I misunderstanding something?
I believe we concluded our routine motion, so we had not discussed whether today's committee meeting will conclude with the completion of the motion, but Monsieur Thériault has brought forward an additional motion for consideration. So we could continue this meeting as we're doing, or we could decide to go in camera, or we can put this for consideration at the next meeting and conclude today's meeting. So I'm not sure what the will of the committee is at this point, but we have concluded our business that we were first called for this first meeting. So Dr. Fry, followed by Senator Delphone.
Just wanted to say, in a spirit of cooperation, and given that we only have a short time to be able to finish this report, I would suggest we consider that motion and we vote on it very quickly, because it's a good motion.
Senator Delphone?
I agree totally. And it's not a substantive motion. It's purely procedural. Doesn't need a 48 hours notice. So I think there's consensus around the table or the screen.
Yeah, so there seems to be agreement that given that we've come to the end, that this is an additional motion we will consider for today. So is it your pleasure to adopt this motion? Carried. So at this time we have concluded. So would members be okay for us to conclude this meeting today with the promise of? Yes, Mr. Barrett?
Yes.
Followed by Senator Wallen.
I apologize for interrupting.
There's a terrible echo.
I just didn't want an adjournment to get ahead of me just because of the hybrid format of the meeting. I understand that there are ongoing discussions between the whip's offices on the House side with respect to scheduling. And we do have 2 weeks of planned constituency time for members on the House side. And I know that we have 2 statutory holidays, namely Good Friday and Easter Monday, along with a number of other religious observances over the course of the next 2-week period. Keeping in mind that those discussions have started and that we've now had this first meeting, I I would suggest respectfully to our co-chairs that that those discussions in collaboration with the Senate side proceed, and that perhaps over the early days of next week, a tentative calendar can be set, because I also understand we don't even have a set time for meetings. One other thing, if I may, Madam Chair, I would just offer that this issue is supremely important. But due to the nature of hybrid meetings and the situation we find ourselves in as a result of the resources that these draw from the House, every hour that we sit during sitting weeks, we take away time from standing committees. And so I understand that forms part of that discussion, but I think that it could be detrimental to our work, our collective work as parliamentarians, if we moved forward in a direction that undermined our colleagues in both places and displaced other committees and their ability to do their work, their commitment to witnesses, and their ability to carry out their studies, which are also looking to. Many of them are in the final stages, so that they can give drafting instructions to their analysts and get reports to the House before the end of June. So time is very sensitive for all of us, but I would just hope that those discussions could happen at the Whip and Senate level, and that we could then convene once we have a better picture of what that looks like, and then proceed with the amount of time that we're able to take with the resources that are available.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Baird. And I too am aware that we don't yet have the exact time slot for this joint committee. That is being worked out as we speak through the Whip's offices. And as you said, the next 2 weeks, there are a lot of schedules already created, and that it's a very, very busy time for parliamentary work. So let me go to Senator Wallin, then Dr. Fry, and then we can try and conclude for today with certain understanding.
Je veux prendre la parole là-dessus.
I wish to speak to this issue as well, if I may.
The list, Mr. Thériault. So Senator Wallin first.
Thank you. Just wanted to voice some of the concerns about our timing on this as well. The Senate has been reduced to one committee meeting a week for our committees. And so it's crucial that we not miss those, because we're all in the same position of cramming before the end of June. So what days are even under consideration? Because I'm thinking at the Senate schedule that Tuesdays and Wednesdays are almost impossible at this point.
Yes, Senator, I know that Monday evening and potentially Tuesday evenings are what I have heard, but as you said, Tuesdays are very busy for senators also, so perhaps it comes down to Monday, but it's not yet set, and the Whips are discussing. So Dr. Fry, followed by Monsieur Thériault.
I just wanted to say that the Whips are discussing it so that by the end of the 2-week break, we will have something to work with. But it is my understanding, however, that because of resources at the House of Commons level, we will not be infringing on any standing committee time. Those are set and they have resources. So that the resources will be decided on again with a time that the Whip will decide on. And so I just think that we should follow through and just wait until we get the Whip telling us what we should do. And let's just, kind of wait until then. Now, if somebody wanted to meet next week, I hear Wednesday is a good day just to quickly get together to formulate a schedule or something. But if not, I think we should just let the Whips do their work, because they understand resources, they understand time, and they understand what a good day is. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Fry. And Monsieur Thériault?
Mr. Thériault. Yes, Madam Chair. My understanding of the discussions between the Whips, and I heard something about this before coming to the meeting today, that there was some agreement to a 3-hour block on Wednesdays, next Wednesday at least. Secondly, I myself have looked at the free time we will need to work to accomplish what we wish to between now and the 23rd of June. Realistically speaking, based on the calendar and based on the work plan that we might wish to place in the calendar, I'm not just looking at hours, merely the weeks that we have available. If I count the 2 weeks of constituency time, this leads me to 7 weeks before we would need 2 weeks to draw up a report. I don't think that 2 weeks is too much to oversee the writing of the report. That would bring us to the 23rd of June. So basically, if we even count the constituency time, the next 2 weeks, keeping that in mind, we are left with 7 weeks to accomplish our mandate, being to examine the matter of mature minors, mental illness, and early requests, and the condition and issues involving the handicapped persons, people living with a disability, which is quite a lot. So given that we have decided that we will table our report on the 23rd of June, and we know that Quebec, as we know, has carried out their review of the end of life legislation, they had 46 meetings of their steering committee and many meetings of their principal committee. Of course, we can use that material, given that they have worked seriously. That said, if we really want to get all this done and a report tabled by the 23rd of June, we need to work quickly. And I thought that today, after finishing the routine motions, we might immediately, based on motion number 3, decide on a meeting time for the subcommittee so that we could then draw up a calendar, a working calendar. This is merely to move forward as quickly as possible in a responsible manner. All right, so the whips will be telling us next week when we can gather, or we do so right away. When it comes to calling in witnesses, that's something that you can't do at the last minute. As for a working plan, what I humbly feel we should do is work using the motion next Wednesday, 3 hours on mature minors. That's something that we could make good use of. If we meet and decide to meet, we could immediately call witnesses for next Wednesday. I have other suggestions to make as well, given that I took time to look over the calendar, but let me stop here and see what others have to say. And if, as you have surely understood, I am putting forward a motion, bringing forward a motion to the effect that we work as a subcommittee now and discuss a calendar, an agenda immediately, aiming to meet again for 3 hours next Wednesday. That's my motion.
Monsieur Thériault has put forward a motion at this time. So, sorry, Senator Kutcher, I need to just address this motion, which would be for the subcommittee to continue meeting today to have a discussion, correct? Monsieur Thériault? You're asking for us to meet today as a subcommittee following today's full committee meeting.
Et dans le but de...
Yes. And with a view to planning a meeting next Wednesday, a 3-hour meeting from 2:30 in the afternoon until 4:30 in the afternoon, as the whips have agreed to.
Okay, so I'm not sure whether at this time, in terms of timing for this committee and what will happen, we have concluded our main motion. So I'm wondering if before voting on or continuing to discuss Monsieur Theriault's motion, could we conclude this meeting and go in camera and maybe continue our discussion that way? Is that agreeable to everyone? That we conclude this meeting and we go in camera? I see one thumbs up. So seeing no other objections, okay. So as joint co-chair, I will officially conclude today's meeting, and we will go in camera. We'll need about 1 minute to do that. Thank you, colleagues.
And just before we go, Madam Co-Chair, do we have the link for the in-camera session?
I think that's why we'll need 1 minute so that we can go into an in-camera meeting.
Yes, but somebody has to provide us the link for it.
I'm assuming that will be forthcoming.
Me too,
So-
hopefully. Thank you.
So can our clerks confirm that we will receive a new link? Or do we continue at this link?
No, Senator Martin, we will need to suspend momentarily, and a new link will be sent to all members in the next 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you,
or so.
Mireille. So we will suspend and receive a new link. Thank you. Dr. Fry, did you want to say
Yes,
something?
just a question of clarification. When we're coming back in camera, is that going to be the subcommittee or is that going to be the full committee?
It's the full committee to discuss Monsieur Theriault's motion and
All
what he
right,
has
okay.
what he proposed to us. Okay,
All right, good.
so please, we will suspend and receive a new link. Thank you.
you.